was almost like this steroid-like substance. That's like the path to steroids.
What changed your mind? Help us out a little bit. What is creatine and what does it naturally in our body, and why is someone supplementing it?
There's more than 10 different forms of creatine out there that you can potentially buy and obviously then also use.
What would your 3 top reasons be to give it a shot? Let's talk a little bit more about the side effects that creatine can or might have to someone.
That is also what could potentially make your muscles look a little bit bigger.
What about high blood pressure? Is there a difference between men and women in the results or in the effectiveness of creatine?
Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a quick moment to ask you a favor. If you like the video and subscribe to the channel, it'll help us a lot in improving with the YouTube's algorithm. Me and the team behind of Strength Lab 360, we're working day and night to bring you valuable content that helps you improve in the gym. If you like the video, and comment down below which topics we should cover in one of the next videos, it helps us a lot. From the bottom of my heart and the heart of all of the team members, thank you, and let's go into the episode.
So we are here today to talk about a topic that has been covered several times before, which is creatine. It's a topic that has so many myths outside that we thought it might be worth to give it another a deep dive into also the science-based structure behind creatine. And I'm here today with Carl. Carl, you are the Director of Training Science at Strength Lab 360. You are a certified strength coach, and you're about to become a medical doctor as you're nearing your completion of your medical studies. Before we dive into the science side of creatine, what's been your personal experience with creatine, and how did you first came in contact with it?
So the first time I came in contact with creatine was about a year into the gym. First contact with supplements was much earlier, because when I got into the gym and I've got into the supplementation game, so to speak, to me creatine was almost like this steroid-like substance. So it was like there was protein powder, there's steroids, and creatine was like somewhere in between, almost on the level of steroids. And when I first started taking protein powder, I had no second thoughts about it. I was just like, let's go, let's take it. What's going to happen? Like, I was sure that there was no negative side effects of supplementing protein powder at all. And then when it came to creatine, I was a little bit more aware, I would say. I was thinking about it a little bit more. I just had, to me, it had a different feeling. If
A little bit
with
the change to the dark side, right?
Yes, like it was like me, almost like if you go from just supplementing protein all the way to supplementing protein as well as creatine, that's like the path to steroids. And I was actually talking about the perception of creatine with a client of mine last week. She said the exact same thing. It almost felt like before she read up on creatine, she felt like to her it was one step away from steroids pretty much. And obviously knowing what I know now, that's obviously not the case. Whilst it can greatly enhance your performance, it's not it's not gateway drug to steroids, not at all. So first started taking creatine when I was, I think, must have been like 19, 20. Been to the gym for about a year. Made good progress for the first couple of months. Had a friend who showed me the ropes, showed me how to train, what made sense in his view, like how I should structure my training, and he recommended I take creatine as well. So I thought, give it a go. Don't judge before you try. So I tried it. Obviously, I was still very, very new to things, especially to creatine. So I thought I'd mix it with a Coke. Obviously, with a carbonated soda, not a good idea because that just goes everywhere. But I thought maybe like it'll help me drink it better because the creatine was tasteless, the one I had. I mean, most creatine is tasteless, but you can also buy it with flavor.
Mm-hmm.
This one was tasteless, so I had the Coke, went everywhere on the train. So I learned my lesson. I've never mixed it with carbonated drinks again.
What changed your mind in changing to the dark side, as called?
I don't know. I was like, just give it a go. At that point, I wasn't like super into it. Like I read a little bit online. From what I could gather, it seemed safe. Other people were taking it, and also I wanted to make more progress. I wanted to be stronger. I wanted to look bigger, and then it just came about. I went home for summer, as you do, summer vacation at uni. Stopped taking it because I wasn't going to the gym, so I discontinued it. And then it wasn't until a couple of months later when something just flicked for me. I was like, okay, I want to like really give this a go. I want to get a coach. I want to do some like strongman powerlifting style training. But as mentioned earlier, I was quite new to things, so I didn't really know how to. So I got a coach, and obviously paid for the coach. And my first thought was, okay, if I'm paying for someone, I might as well ask them all the questions I have. So I asked mainly, obviously, about nutrition as well. Training plan was already provided, so I was like, how about nutrition? How about supplements? And the recommendation was like definitely creatine and definitely protein powder.
Mm-hmm.
So then I got back on creatine, and pretty much I've been on ever since. I take some time off every year, just for personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's mostly considered safe to continuously take it, but I like to take a break of 2 to 4 weeks every year where I just don't take supplements at all, just for my own personal feeling. That's it.
Okay. So you was starting taking creatine at an age where you have been 19, you said earlier. Did you, before you start taking creatine, did you try to gather more information about it? Because you said also earlier, and I think this is an opinion or something that a lot of people out there might also have, that creatine could be something that is not 100% legal. It is, but it's the first step into the dark side. Was there a moment where you were able to decide for yourself that yes, it's safe and yes, it's okay to take it?
Again, with a professional coach, I just asked the questions. He assured me, or like he said, to the best of his knowledge, it was safe. And then at that point, I wasn't so deeply interested in all the biochemical side of things. I wasn't so interested in what it actually does. I was just trusting the word of someone I judged to be a good source of information in that regard. So that was that for me, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And just because so many people I knew took it, they all recommended it. So for me, it was pretty much that's what made
the safe label.
That was the safe label. That was what made me say, okay, if they all take it and they swear by it, then why should it be different for me? Obviously, I went online, looked up a little bit, but I didn't find anything that contradicted what they were saying, and that for me was enough proof at the time.
Get it. So now that several years later, you're about to become a medical doctor and you're able to look much deeper into the science-based things of creatine, help us out a little bit. What is creatine and what does it naturally in our body, and why is someone supplementing it?
Okay, so what is creatine? Creatine it's a natural compound. It is synthesized from 3 different amino acids. It's glycine, arginine, and methionine that together make up the creatine.
Mm-hmm.
And it is something that you actually produce by yourself. So creatine will naturally be produced by your own body at about 1 gram per day, mainly in your pancreas, liver, and your kidneys. And then someone who follows a regular diet, so someone who follows an omnivorous diet,
which means you eat fish and meat.
Fish and meat mainly. Then if you have that sort of diet, you can get about 1 to 2 grams of creatine on top of the 1 gram that you produce naturally. And that what it does, it enters your system either by regular nutrition, by the stuff that you produce yourself, or in most cases also by supplementing it. So if you take creatine, the creatine will be stored in your muscle, as mentioned earlier. And in your muscle, it will be about 2/3 phosphocreatine, and the phosphocreatine can bridge the gap between just utilizing the regular ATP and getting glucose involved in energy production. Usually it lasts about 2 to 3 seconds. So from 2 to 3 seconds up to 20 seconds. There's obviously the variation. It can be also like only 10 seconds. But if you supplement creatine, you have greater creatine in your muscle. You have greater phosphocreatine in your muscle, which means you can prolong this availability of the bridge, so to speak, as you can rephosphorylate more ATP.
Okay. So what then makes it so interesting for strength athletes?
Yeah. So the biggest gain in terms of performance, because of the phosphocreatine in your muscle and the rephosphorylating of ADP, is the main benefit is any activity that's less than 30 seconds. Because if you need quick, explosive energy for a short bout of energy and a short bout of exercise, the creatine can really help with that, as you have essentially more ATP capacity. Doesn't mean your muscle actually can hold more ATP, but you can quickly make more ATP, so to speak. So maybe if you usually,
it's just an energy boost that you can get where in a normal state your muscle would be running out of ATP. If you're high on creatine, you're able to get a push from that.
Say, for argument's sake, and obviously this is just a numbers example. Imagine you have 10 ATP stored. Those are used up after 3 seconds. And you have 5 phosphocreatine. Then you can get the 5 back, and you have another 5 to spend. And that then gives you 10 ATP for a duration of 10 seconds.
Yeah.
If you didn't have any phosphocreatine, you use the 5 ATP, but you have to wait for a glucose metabolizing energy production. So that will also replenish your ATP. But it will take much longer. So to get the 5 back, it might take 30 seconds. It might take a minute. So the glucose, quick excursus to glucose. There's two. There's the anaerobic, aerobic. Anaerobic, everyone knows when your muscle starts to burn, that's the lactate. And that the lactate, that's a form of glucose utilization without oxygen. And that can supply you for about a minute. Right? So you also get back the ATP, but with the phosphocreatine, you get it back quicker. So then if you have 10 ATP and you usually only have 5 phosphocreatine, you can only replenish half before you have to move on to utilizing glucose. If you have 10, but also 10 phosphocreatine, not saying that this is like it will increase it by 100%, but this is just like a numbers example. If you have then 10, then you get all the 10 replenished quickly, so you can technically do, say, one more rep. If you do bench press 10 reps, maybe you add another rep because you just have the ability to
have that another push.
Yes, the ability to generate ATP more quickly. Obviously, those stores at some point will also run out. So if you're an endurance athlete, then for the endurance part, you want to be in the aerobic respiration, so aerobic energy production. And if you want to lose fat, for example, you also want to be in the aerobic part of energy production, because that's when fat is utilized. But for these short bouts of power, of energy production, for example, like a sprint, if you road cycle, they do the sprints, end of Tour de France, for example, they sprint to the line. That's usually not more than like a 30-second event. That's where you can really benefit. The 180 kilometers before, not so much. There's other ways in which creatine might benefit those. But in terms of the energy benefit from creatine, that's for the first 30 seconds.
Get it, okay. So we talked about strength athletes, we talked about endurance athletes. Let's talk about different forms of creatine. There are several forms out there. I think the most commonly used is creatine monohydrate. Can you break down for us what are the differences between the several creatine forms there are outside?
There's more than 10 different forms of creatine out there that you can potentially buy and obviously then also use. I think the most three common ones. First, you have the creatine monohydrate, as you've mentioned. That's the one that's also been used in most of the studies. So if you read a study about creatine, that's usually about creatine monohydrate. Then you have micronized creatine, which is supposed to be easier on your gastrointestinal system, because especially with loading phases of creatine, the loading phase of creatine. So there's two different forms how you can start supplementing creatine. One is you can just figure out your daily dose, and you just take that day. Like you take it Monday, Tuesday, all the way to Sunday. You take it every day. The second option is you do what's called a loading phase, and that's what I did when I was first introduced to creatine, because it was said to be more efficient. Nowadays, we know there's hardly any difference between the two. But you're more likely to have less side effects if you don't do the loading, especially on the gastrointestinal side of things, because in the loading phase, you take, instead of the usual 0.03 grams per kilogram of body weight, you take 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you're 100 kilos, usually you take 3 grams a day. For the loading phase, you'd be taking 30.
Okay.
The idea behind it is that you can saturate your muscle stores quicker, so you will get quicker results from taking creatine. And that then, in some people, has led to gastrointestinal problems. So therefore, either just do a regular, normal creatine taking if you have gastrointestinal problems with creatine, or you can switch to the micronized creatine, which is supposed to be easier on your gastrointestinal system.
Got it.
And then,
so we have the micronized creatine, we have creatine monohydrate. Are there other forms anyone can get on the market?
There are other forms. There's one more that springs to mind for me immediately because I've tried it, and that's creatine hydrochloride. That is more soluble in water, and it's therefore supposed to be easier or more efficient in terms of absorption. So because it's more soluble in water and therefore more easy to absorb by your body, the amount you have to take is smaller than the amount of creatine monohydrate, but that comes at an increased cost. So overall, the best value for money and the one that has the most research is by far creatine monohydrate. So that's what I'm taking, and that's what I would recommend. If someone were to ask me which form of creatine do you recommend, it'd definitely be the creatine monohydrate.
Monohydrate, okay. So you mentioned the gastrointestinal symptoms or dysfunctions one can have when supplementing creatine. There are different other ghosts out there when it comes to side effects when using creatine. I think everyone heard about that one that creatine can increase weight gain. Let's talk a little bit more about the side effects that creatine can or might have to someone, and if it's actually something that an athlete should be worried about.
For sure. So obviously you mentioned the weight gain, and the weight gain is a very simply explained mechanism. So you take creatine, and creatine increases the osmotic gradient. What that means, once creatine is inside your cell, it pulls some water also into the cell. So you have more intracellular water. That's why I would always recommend that you make sure that you drink enough, especially when you're new to creatine. That is also what could potentially make your muscles look a little bit bigger, and it can also aid in recovery after tough training, and it potentially has benefits for athletes who work out in very humid or hot, humid conditions where hydration is a key factor because it sort of hyperhydrates your cells. And then if you work out in a heat environment, that can be beneficial with the creatine supplementation. What also seems to be of concern is, number one, the kidneys. Number two, cardiovascular system, and sometimes still the hair loss. I've been asked many times about the kidney and the cardiovascular side or side effects, potential side effects of creatine. Sometimes even about the hair loss, but I think the hair loss has pretty much been rebunked by now. And
I think it was one study that
I believe
yeah.
I believe there was one study that suggested that there might be a connection, but personally I've not experienced hair loss, I hope, and I've never seen any of my clients have any sort of like hair loss situation when supplementing creatine. When we look at the kidney, and that's been shown in studies that supplementing creatine will increase your creatinine levels. In order to know that creatine doesn't damage your kidneys, you should have, or it's beneficial to understand the basics of creatinine. So creatinine is a compound that is a breakdown product of creatine, and it will be released from your muscles. If you utilize creatine, some of the creatine is just going to be used up, and it will be excreted as creatinine. And in medicine, creatinine is used to check for your kidney health. It's a marker for kidney health. And the reason it's being used as a marker for kidney health is that it is produced at a steady level. So there's no fluctuations. If you are a healthy person, the amount of creatinine that is produced will be at a steady level, and the creatine is excreted through your kidney. So if you monitor the level and suddenly the blood level rises, the blood creatinine level rises.
So it's a blood work that's been done?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like you take your blood and the creatine level has increased. That usually means that the creatinine is not filtered as it's supposed to. However, if you supplement creatine, because you have more creatinine is produced, so you have a higher level of creatinine. In that scenario, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit higher, because you just have more, so there's more excreted. It's not a marker that is produced by your kidneys as a response to damage, but rather as it's a marker that measures or gives an indication to how well your kidneys are functioning. So if for some reason you have regular blood work done and someone checks your creatinine levels, it might be worth making sure to let the people that check it know that you've started supplementing creatine, because that will increase your creatinine levels, but it doesn't mean that your kidneys have
damage.
Any sort of damage.
What about high blood pressure?
I've been asked this question fairly recently as well, and I don't no study comes to mind where that was mentioned. To me, I tried to understand how someone would get there. And the argument was, for high blood pressure, the argument was that you retain more water. And if you have more water, your blood pressure will increase. And whilst I can understand, or I can see the argument, because you do have more water, right? We've talked about how creatine in your cell changes the osmotic gradient, so it pulls more water into your cell, which increases your intracellular water. If it was the other way around, of some reason, like never say never, maybe for some person the creatine remains in the bloodstream, which like biochemistry and physiologically to me doesn't make sense. Like the whole, why wouldn't it go into your muscle? And if it, like, it's not going to stay in your blood, it's going to go either, like, it will be excreted or it will go in your muscle. But if you increase your extracellular water, then that would lead to high blood pressure. For example, if you have someone who has severely low blood pressure, you give them volume to increase the amount they have within their vascular system to increase the blood pressure. But because the creatine pulls the water to the inside of the cell, it does not affect the extracellular water, or it shouldn't affect the extracellular water. Obviously, there's always, like, as I said earlier, there might be one person for whom the creatine will, for whatever reason, increase the extracellular water, but that's not how creatine works in most people. That's not what creatine does in most people. So I have found no research that suggests that creatine will increase your blood pressure. Obviously, if you suffer from very high blood pressure, then, well, you shouldn't really suffer from high blood pressure, because if you have high blood pressure, you should have that treated, and therefore you should have normal blood pressure. But if you have high blood pressure, you should definitely go see a doctor anyways. And if you are someone who's prone to very, very high blood pressure, you should check with your physician first before taking creatine. But overall, because creatine increases the intracellular water, and the extracellular water is the one that could potentially increase your blood pressure, I don't think, in my opinion of anatomy, physiology, I don't think creatine will increase your blood pressure. I can see how people get to the conclusion because you have more water, and there are ways in which more water can increase your blood pressure. But if you break it down into extracellular and intracellular water, and you can understand that creatine increases intracellular water, then in my understanding and in my opinion, there's no reason to assume that creatine will increase blood pressure.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of younger training people have increased throughout the last few years. And the kids I see in the gym are getting younger and younger and younger. And also not only that they start training earlier than they did 10 or 20 years before. I think there's also a rising of food supplementation in that younger athletes. Would you recommend taking creatine for athletes below? I mean, you were 18 when you started taking creatine. Is it a safe supplement also for younger athletes? And when I talk about the younger athletes, I mean everyone who's over 14.
That's a very good question. I have not found, or am not aware of, any research that suggests that it's not safe.
Okay.
But I have also not been able to find, or I have not read any research where they've tested it on younger people.
Mm-hmm.
To my understanding of the biochemistry of creatine, I don't see why someone under the age of 18 shouldn't or couldn't take it.
Mm-hmm.
personally, to be on the safe side, I would always recommend someone who I'm training to wait at least until they're 16 to take creatine.
Yeah. Then let's talk about best practice when supplementing creatine. Is timing something that matters?
Overall, no. So I think there's been one study that suggested that you have an added benefit if you take it after the workout. I've been told by different people about different protocols how to maximize the efficiency of creatine. For example, one guy in the gym once told me take half before, half after the workout. To my knowledge and to what I can find in terms of scientific backup, mostly it doesn't matter. Especially you don't have to split it because it's something that accumulates and you benefit from the accumulation of creatine or phosphocreatine in your muscle. So therefore, when you take it, it's not so important in comparison to if you take it not continuously. So the most important point, or the point I want to make, is that you should take it every day because you want to keep the levels high. You want to keep the saturation in your muscle up. So take it every day. It doesn't really matter when. I would suggest you find a time that works for you where you don't forget.
Okay. So it's not like a pre-workout booster where you need to have it 20 minutes before training because it's like a storage tank filled with creatine, and the most important thing is to keep that tank all the time full.
Well, the analogy of a tank actually applies very well to creatine, but not in the sense that it runs out over the course of a day. It's pretty much your muscles are a tank, and you can fill them with creatine, and then you have the most benefit of creatine. But it does not run out throughout the day. So just make sure that you take it every day. You keep the tank full. You top it up, like you have a little bit of leakage, so you top it up every day. But then you have it at the nice steady state, and that's where you want to have it.
For athletes who are curious about their progress, how can an athlete measure if creatine is working?
Good question. The answer to that is have a feeling for your own performance, have a feeling for your own body. If you start supplementing creatine and suddenly there's a weight increase, for example, or suddenly the weights feel easier, or suddenly you feel more of a mind-muscle connection, or you get more of a pump, that might be indications that the creatine is affecting you, and that can take anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 weeks to feel the difference. The weight gain or the weight increase on the scale usually comes much quicker. That can be like 1 to 2 weeks, depending how you take it, obviously. If you load it, then quicker. If you don't load it, it can take a little bit longer. If you really wanted to know how much creatine you have in your muscles, the only way to find out for sure would be a muscle biopsy. But that's a very impractical way of finding out whether creatine in your muscles is saturated or not.
Of course, it won't be feasible for anyone. So we've talked about how we can measure if creatine is working for us. What about non-responders?
Non-responders is a very interesting topic. I think 20 to 30 people are classified. 20 to 30% of people that take creatine are classified as non-responders. That means they don't see or experience a change when supplementing creatine. That can have many different reasons, but there's nothing that works for everyone. So some people will always, just on a genetic basis, on a completely individual basis, not benefit from something. But there's also the people that have a very high baseline creatine level. So coming back to your analogy of the filled up tank, if your tank's already full and you keep throwing gas in it, it's just going to overflow and if you start going, if the gas tank usually gets you 500 miles, you start overflowing, you start overfilling, you can still only go 500 miles. Like there's no extra tank that will fill up with the excess stuff.
Makes
sense. So if your baseline is high or your creatine muscle saturation level is complete, then supplementing creatine might not make a difference in terms of performance. If you have a low baseline, then obviously the lower your baseline, say your baseline is 1/5 of 100%. Same with your tank. If your tank is 1/5, you're going to go 1/5 the distance. So then if you supplement and you make sure the tank is full, 100% full, obviously the distance you can travel much longer. So if your baseline is low, the benefit from supplementing will be much bigger to you.
So a vegan or vegetarian might benefit a bit more than an athlete who is already eating a quite amount of food like fish or meat.
Exactly. So a vegetarian, like on average, I would say the vegan benefits the most, then the vegetarian, and then someone who regularly consumes meat, just because of the amount of animal products that they consume. Like a vegetarian might still eat fish, so therefore they might be still getting some creatine, but not to the same extent as someone who's on an omnivorous diet. But the vegan will never eat fish, obviously, and then the baseline is even lower because they have only the creatine that's produced by their own bodies without the 1 to 2 grams per day. So they always have 1 gram, whilst the vegetarian might get 1 gram from the diet, so they have 2 grams. And then if you're a person on an omnivorous diet, you might get 3 grams, 1 from yourself and 2 from your food. It's like very easily explained. Obviously, again, this is not true for everyone, but to easily explain it, it's vegan has naturally 1 gram, vegetarian 2, and omnivorous diet has 3. So therefore, if you supplement with 3 grams, the vegan will benefit most.
Yeah.
Like say for example, like back to the tank, let's say full tank, 5 grams of creatine. If you already have 3 grams naturally, you will only benefit from 2 grams. And so forth with the vegetarians and the vegans as well.
Sure. Is there a difference between men and women? We had it a little bit earlier that occurring on the body weight, you will choose the right amount of creatine for yourself. So it might be easy to differentiate between a man and a woman in terms of weight. But is there a difference between men and women in the results or in the effectiveness of creatine?
There's potential that there's increased benefit for women purely based on the baseline. So if one assumes that women on average have a lower baseline, obviously they benefit more. But in terms of absorption and in terms of effectiveness of outcome, there's no difference between men and women.
In preparation for today's podcast, I was reading some studies, and this is now focusing more on a topic that might be outside the gym, but creatine, or the studies that I've read, quoted that creatine could have potential benefits that not only target the strength or endurance athlete. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So there's what I would call a claim by people that there's a neurological benefit of creatine. If you dive a little bit deeper into the research and you read some of the studies, there are studies that suggest that working memory can be improved by supplementing creatine, and mental function, especially in strenuous situations, can also be improved by supplementing creatine. So there's a case to be made for creatine in terms of cognitive enhancement.
Yes.
There's also some studies that suggest that there's benefits of supplementing creatine in terms of preventing neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease. But to my knowledge, those studies have not been so conclusive as to claim that creatine can prevent those, full stop. There's the indication that they might do, but I believe there's much more research that needs to be done before claiming that there's significant neurological benefits from using creatine.
That sounds like a very interesting field of research that's to be done within the next years. So to wrap it up, in overall, it sounds like creatine is a supplement that has been researched a lot, if not the most. If there are athletes outside and still on the fence about taking creatine, what would your 3 top reasons be to give them on hand to give it a shot?
Number 1, after all, it is the most researched supplement, and the studies show that it is safe even for long-term use. There's a study I'd like to mention that showed that I think it was 5 years where people continuously took creatine and there were no adverse side effects. That's number 1. Number 2, it's quite easy to get a hold of. And it's also quite cheap to do so. I think 1 tub of creatine monohydrate will cost you about 15 euros, and that's worth about 3 months supply. So quite cheap. If you calculate it down to a daily cost, it will be quite cheap. And number 3, it's pretty effective, and there's a difference that you'll be able to notice usually quite quickly. So 2 to 4 weeks, and you can see that either your 1 rep max has improved or that your general overall performance in the gym has improved. I actually had a client, and she runs, and her sprint times had improved as well. So there's the point to be made for runners or for cyclists who do the sprints, that they can improve those times. And that's the 3 reasons that I would mention.
So Carl, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
It was great to talk about a topic that has been in focus for so many times, but is still for so many people unclear. For anyone else who's interested in the topic, you have written a comprehensive paper with additional information, science-backed research papers. We will put the link in the short notes for anyone to download. It would be great to have you here back soon to reveal some other myth or misconceptions about the fitness and strength training.
Sure, it was a pleasure being here, and I'm excited to dive into the next topic that you want to clear up.